Hi there, scholars. Welcome back to another art project with Ms. Schmidt. Today, our art project is entitled Arts and Science, and the reason for that is because we're actually going to be mixing ingredients together in order to make our own clay. So these are ingredients that you can find in your home, normally with the baking supplies. All you're going to need for today's lesson is going to be some water, some salt, and some flour. Other things you're going to need is going to be a measuring cup. I have a measuring cup here, but mostly I'm going to be using my smaller cups because they tend to have little labels on them that tell you exactly how much you're getting. And I find that a little bit more trustworthy sometimes for myself than using this glass here. So we're going to be mixing the ingredients together, and I actually have a little bit of a math problem for you too, because when I got this recipe, I got it for 1/4 cup of water, 1/4 cup of salt, and 1/2 cup of flour. But today, when I'm making it with you, I'd really like to double the recipe because you're going to want to have enough clay to make more than one thing, or maybe you want to share with your siblings. So what we're really going to focus on is we're going to start with the math to double it, and then we're going to add it in our bowl here. So as we go, I'm going to be asking you to follow along with these fractions. I know fractions are usually more for our 3rd graders, 4th graders, 5th graders, but it's something that's important when you're baking, whether you're going to be baking art supplies or whether you're going to be baking in the kitchen. It's really important to get your head around how fractions work as it pertains to recipes and baking and making things. So our first amount that we need to put in our bowl is going to be 1/4 cup of water. But again, I really want to double that so that we have extra clay later. So you can see that I've drawn a little diagram here, and I have my bowl and it's in quarters, and I have 1/4 filled in. Now, normally we think 1/4 plus 1/4, well, that must be 1/8. But that's not how it works with fractions. With fractions, it really helps to draw a picture. So I have this picture of fourths, and I have 1/4 already in there. And if I am going to add another fourth, I'm simply going to color in another quadrant or another space of my circle. Now you can see that if I color in this extra quarter, 1/4 plus 1/4 equals 1/2. So when I add water in, I'm going to be adding in 1/2 of a cup. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. I'm going to get my measuring cups and I'm going to read them. It says 1/4 cup, 1/3 cup. Here it is, 1/2 of a cup. And I'm going to take my water and I'm going to carefully pour it in. Now, when you pour it in, I highly recommend that you pour it in over your bowl. So that way, if you accidentally spill, it will go inside the bowl. So I have 1/2 cup of water and I'm going to go ahead and pour it in. Now, I'm moving on to my salt. Again, my first recipe called for 1/4 cup of salt, but I want to double that because if I double the first thing, I need to double everything in order to make the recipe work. So my 1/4 cup of salt is colored in here on my diagram, and I'm going to color in 1 more 1/4 cup. That means I'm going to color in 1 more space. And again, just like with the water, that leaves me with 1/2 of a cup. So I'm going to add 1/2 a cup of salt. Now, my measuring cup might be a little wet still from the water. So if a little bit of salt sticks in there, that's all right. I'm going to use a spatula to get the rest out. So I'm going to go ahead and pour my salt in, and I'm going to make sure it gets all the way up to that edge. Again, I did that over my mixing bowl because I didn't want it to spill anywhere. So I have it all the way up to the edge, and I'm going to go ahead and pour that into my bowl as well. You'll notice that I still have salt in there, and that makes sense because the measuring cup was a little wet. So I'm just going to take my spatula and make sure the rest of that gets in there. We want every little bit of salt so that our dough doesn't end up too wet. My last ingredient is going to be flour. And the flour in my original recipe was supposed to be a half cup. So I need to add one more half cup. Now that's not as simple as saying 1/2 plus 1/2 must equal 1/4, because as you can see, 1/4 is much smaller than 1/2. So I don't need to add another half mathematically in the way we normally think. I need to add it to my picture, and I'm going to color in another half of my circle. And if you'll notice, when I color in that second half of my circle, I now have the full circle colored in. That means I need 1 whole cup of flour. I should have labeled all these the first time. Your math teachers would be so upset with me. So now I'm going back to my measuring cups, and I'm going to my full cup. And that's this big one right here. That's a lot of flour. But that flour is going to help our dough or our Play-Doh really hold its form and be malleable, meaning it's going to be movable for us to work with. When you're working with flour, be very careful pouring it. If you're one of the younger scholars that we have, definitely ask an older sibling or a guardian or a parent to help you pour it, because the bag can be a little loose and we certainly don't want to make a mess. Again, I'm doing it over my bowl, and I'm pouring it very carefully, very slowly until I get that full cup. I'm going to tap it quietly on the side so that it evens out. I'm a little bit light. I may need to add more flour later, but let's start with this. So I put it into my bowl. Now I have my mixture, and I'll tell you what, it does not look a lot like Play-Doh yet or clay yet. So I'm going to take my spatula, and I'm going to start using the spatula to mix it. That's my first step. Once it starts to really mix together and get a little thicker, I'll be able to use my hands. But we want to really mix that water in first, let it combine or scientifically mix with our flour so that we have a little bit more. You do not want to put your hands in it just yet, because you definitely want to make sure it's well mixed before you start getting your hands involved in this one. Now, as you mix it, you're going to notice it's pretty clumpy to start. That's all right. That's normal. That's how we're getting our dough in the mix. You're going to want to use your spatula to get all that extra flour off the side. And when it starts getting a little too hard for you to mix with your spatula, you can grab it with your hands. Now, a couple of things might happen while you're mixing. I'll get that last bit off my spatula. This is the part where our fingers get a little messy. If you notice that your mixture is too watery, meaning it's still very goopy even after you try to mix it for a while, you're going to want to add a little bit more flour. Now, don't add a lot of flour to start. Add just a little bit, and then continue to add a little bit until you get the consistency that you want. You also might run into the problem that it is too dry, and that would mean that you need a little bit more water. Now, with this kind of project, a little bit of water goes a very long way. So again, only mix a little bit of water in at a time so that you can get that correct consistency. Now, I still have a lot left at the bottom of my bowl, but I chose to work with just a little bit. And I'm noticing that as I'm kneading it, I'm finding a lot of pieces of flour that weren't mixed in very well. So it's a good thing that I'm taking this extra step and kneading it with my hands, because you really want to get all that salt, all that flour, all that water mixed together so that you can have something that will work with you for the long haul. Now I'm noticing that this might be a touch dry. I'm going to wait for just a minute and see if I can't knead that together. It might just need a little bit more mixing. And I also noticed that it's a little sticky to my fingers. If you find that is the case, you're going to take, again, just a little bit. A little bit will do it. And I'm just going to put a little bit on my hands and rub them together. Now I have pretty floury hands, but it's gonna make the dough stick to me a little bit less and make it a little bit easier for me to knead it. Again, you'll notice I did not add a lot of flour because you definitely don't want to make this too dry, or it's not going to hold any of the cool sculptures that you're going to be creating with it. I'm going to set that down. Now I still have a little bit left in here, and I notice that the stuff that's left in my bowl is just a little bit dry. So again, I can add a little water, but when I do, I add so little. Boop. That's all. Just a little bit to start. And then I can try and mix that around some more. I'm going to set this one to the side, and I'm going to set it on my paper. When you're working with your Play-Doh or your clay, even after you're done mixing it, you want to make sure that you have something, some kind of placemat or wax paper or cardboard. If you have any, boxes around the house, cereal boxes are something good that you can use underneath it, because that's going to keep it from sticking to the table. And it's always heartbreaking when you work so hard on a piece of clay and then you find that it just sticks to the table and you have to destroy it and you can't pick it up and show anyone. And we've had that happen in the art classroom. So you definitely want to make sure that you're working on top of a mat, a placemat of sorts. So this one's still being kneaded, and it takes a little while of kneading. Your hands are going to get a little messy, and that's okay. Sometimes in art, it's fun to get a little messy. But that little bit of water definitely did the trick. I definitely have much better clay in front of me, and I'm going to even add that to my bigger piece of clay. So now I have something to mold with. Gentlemen and families, when you make this clay, it can be used over and over again. The main thing you need to keep in mind is when you are not using it, it's best if it is refrigerated. It's going to keep all the ingredients from kind of falling apart or separating. So put it in a plastic bag, put that plastic bag in your refrigerator when you're not using it. I might also recommend labeling that plastic bag, because if you do not, it will maybe accidentally eaten by an older brother or a little brother or a little sister, and it will be the worst tasting cookie ever because it's just flour and salt. It won't hurt them because it's all ingredients from the kitchen, but it is not going to be very tasty and they will not be very happy with you. But it is a good place to store it in the refrigerator so that you have something to work with anytime that you're bored or looking for a creative process to do. Thank you so much for joining me today for our art and math and science lesson. I had so much fun getting messy with you, and I look forward to joining you for another art lesson soon. Have a good day.